It turns out that a small group of people having access to information that the rest of the population does not have access to is a problem big enough that it could collapse the entire global economy. I'm Colin Wright, and you are watching Consider This. This tendency of some people, usually a small group of people, having information that other people do not have is called information asymmetry in economic circles. And this is something that has a great number of negative byproducts if we allow it to grow to too large a scale. And so there's a lot of efforts in place that try to help alleviate it. The point that we hope to get to someday is a point called perfect information, where everyone has access to the same information at any time that they might need it. So every single person knows every single thing that they might need to know, the same as every other person that they might interact with. And this allows us to feel more confident in the purchases that we're making. And this is obviously not the state that we've reached quite yet. You can think of a couple obvious examples of this probably right off the bat. Think of going to a used car dealership, for example. Chances are the person trying to sell you that car knows a great deal more about the car than you do. And as a result, they have an advantage in terms of making a deal over you, the person coming into the lot for the first time, to whom all of these cars are completely opaque. You don't know anything about their history, you don't know anything about past owners, and so as a result, you don't know what would be the correct price to pay for these cars. The dealer, on the other hand, the salespeople, have access to a great deal more information than you do, and so they have an economic advantage. As a result, you don't tend to trust these people quite so much because there might be something that they're not telling you. And the consequence of this type of disparity in the information that we have is, as we don't trust each other, we tend to participate differently in the global economic system. If consumers are less likely to trust the people who are selling things online, for example, they're less likely to take risks within that economic system. And as a result, there's going to be less participation in that economic system, and when they do participate, they'll be less likely to take risks, so the prices will go down. This can apply in the opposite direction, though, as well. For example, with insurance. People who are trying to sell insurance do not necessarily know, for numerous reasons, what the current health of the person that they're trying to insure is, or what the driving record of the person they're trying to insure is. So they try to put in place different screening mechanisms that will allow them to determine what type of risk they are taking on this person that they are going to be insuring. These screening mechanisms, however, are still very imperfect. So somebody who has a terrible driving record and enjoys running people over any chance they get might be able to cover that up, might be able to fake it in some way, and as a result get insured, which would cost the insurance companies a bunch of money. Again, asymmetric information creates a system where we don't feel as comfortable trusting each other anymore. And so as I mentioned, there's a lot of screening mechanisms that people and organizations try to put into place to alleviate some of this disparity in information. When a company is trying to hire somebody for a certain position, for example, and they're trying to hire somebody who is good at learning, good at picking up new skills as they work, they could just say, we're looking for somebody who's good at learning. Or they could try to put in place some kind of screening mechanism that would allow them to filter the results before they go in and interview potentially thousands of applicants. And so if they just trusted people, if they just decided to trust, what they would have is thousands of people saying, oh yeah, I'm good at learning, without having any way of knowing whether they were telling the truth or not ahead of time. If they are able to somehow filter this group, they might be able to reduce it down to a few hundred or a few dozen instead, which is a much better way of doing this type of interview. Unfortunately, what tends to happen then is that some of these screening mechanisms are wildly imperfect, and in some cases they even test for the wrong thing. A really common screening mechanism that companies use to try to find, for example, somebody who is good at learning things is to say, well, if they've graduated from college or university, they've gone through a multi-year process of learning, they're probably good at learning. This is not always the case. And the people who didn't go through these processes might be better at learning than the people who did. And so this is a system put into place to try to alleviate this information disparity, this information inequality that is occurring here, because the company trying to hire people doesn't know as much about these people as they know about themselves. But as a result, what they're doing is filtering for the wrong thing, which creates an entirely different problem. I've seen the type of mistrust that can develop from this type of information inequality work against individuals, but also work against societies full of people. In societies where there are no laws, for example, against counterfeiting, and where it's very, very easy to rip people off consistently without a lot of repercussions as a result of that if you're caught, chances are the consumers there are a little bit wary about what they're purchasing. And as a result, all the prices on everything go down. People are less likely to invest in something that they do not know everything about, that they're not absolutely certain of, and they're more likely to buy from these great big brand names and other entities that they feel they can trust because there's no other certitude in what they're buying. They might think that they're paying for one thing and end up with something completely different, and there's no repercussions if that's the case. This is the reason that in a lot of cultures, e-commerce has been very slow to develop, because when you don't feel that you can even trust the person selling you something down the street, of course you're not going to trust this nameless, faceless person on the internet. So as many downsides as there can be with the regulations in place in places like the United States and parts of Europe, these regulations also make us feel that there would be repercussions if something goes wrong, and as a result we can be a little bit more trusting with these economies, including the online economy. The opposite of that, of course, is also true. If you don't trust your local economy, chances are you're not going to trust in a bigger global economy either. And so the bigger this gets, the bigger it scales, the more important it is that we have as close to perfect information, universal information for everybody, so that we're all on the same page, the more important that becomes if this is going to operate correctly. Fortunately, there are a lot of things, a lot of tools, and a lot of movements out there that are trying to move us closer to perfect information. The Fourth Estate, that is the traditional journalistic press, has always been an important component of this. And even though there are a lot of biased news sources out there today, there's still a great deal of good being done by the traditional Fourth Estate. The so-called Fifth Estate is also becoming an ever more important component to perfect information development in the global economy. This is bloggers, podcasters, YouTube people, all of this new media stuff and all of this pseudo-journalism that's happening where we're sharing information with each other. This kind of chat box that we've got going where we can share our opinions and share information and try to alleviate the mistruths that are being shared, try to water those down and lower their impact. This can also be a great force for good in this way. And part of the reason that the Fifth Estate works so well is that all of us have an increasing access to things like Wikipedia, vast sources of knowledge that if we choose to tap into them, allows us to have essentially all of the information ever generated, all of the data, all of the research, all of the knowledge ever created by the human race. And finally, there's a movement that's happening in governments and corporations around the world right now, revolving around less censorship and less opaqueness. And what that means is that they're essentially opening up because they're realizing that it's more and more difficult for them to hoard this information and keep it secret and confidential. And so as a result, things like here in the US, the Freedom of Information Act allows you to request information that might have been previously held back from the press and from the public. It allows you to make it public. And so that, combined with a lot of the leaks that are happening from people like Edward Snowden and other whistleblowers, places like WikiLeaks, this is allowing us to have access to more information than ever before. And again, if we choose to use it, then we are more informed and as a result can trust that we have the information that we need to make intelligent decisions about everything, including how we participate in the global economic system that we are all a part of. It's been said that the future that we're going to actually live in won't look so much like 1984, where one government controls everything and they censor everything that they want and they try to convince you that the truth is not truth and the not truth is truth. And instead it'll be something more like what you find in the book Brave New World, where all of the knowledge is available, but we tend not to make use of it because we would rather fixate on these entertainments that we also have access to. It just doesn't seem as interesting as the other stuff that we've got. These entertainments are obviously also very important. They're an important part of our cultural development, and they allow us to express ourselves and express ideas in an important way very often. But it's also really important that as we're determining how to distribute these things, that we also focus a lot of our time and energy on making sure that we can distribute other types of information as well. Things that are not as immediately entertaining and interesting, but we figure out how to make them part of our diet. The same way that we ensure to make broccoli part of our diet rather than just eating Twinkies all day. We have to make sure that these things balance out if we're going to be educated enough and informed enough to participate in this global society that we are building. Doing so will allow us to be savvy enough to filter the signal from the noise, the important information from the obfuscating information that we don't actually need, to filter the truth and the actual data, the actual statistics and metrics, and to filter that away from the opinions and from the biased think pieces and the propaganda. And if we can all do this, if we can all graze from a vast array of different resources, get our information and our news from a bunch of different places so that we're not being fed one party line and not only viewing the sources of information that immediately agree with our preconceived notions, which flatters us but doesn't inform or challenge us, not only will we be less likely to be taken advantage of by people who have more and complete information than we have, we will also stand a pretty good chance of keeping this global economy that we are enjoying the fruits of from collapsing completely. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, a share or a like would be amazing. You can find out more about me and my work at colin.io. My blog is at exilelifestyle.com, and you can find my podcast at letsknowthings.com. If you'd like to ask me a question to answer in a future episode, you can do that in the comment section below or at the Consider This page on Facebook. And you can find me personally on pretty much every social network at Colin is my name.